Welcome back to Game of Theories, where I introduce theories of management, administration, and leadership. This is episode 43. Today, we'll explore organizational ignorance. Organizations can sometimes act against their own best interest without realizing it. For example, promotion criteria may unwittingly incentivize the withholding of important information or the undermining of colleagues. Such behaviors, although rewarded, can have detrimental effects on team performance. Similarly, an unwillingness to heed constructive criticism or innovative suggestions can stifle productivity and lead to operational inefficiencies. Management may also be culpable in perpetuating a culture of negativity by retaining supervisors who belittle staff or provide inadequate direction, thereby undermining employee morale. Moreover, organizational culture may prioritize conformity over critical questioning, discouraging the challenging of established norms. These counterproductive organizational behaviors are symptoms of organizational ignorance. What is organizational ignorance exactly? Let's first look at ignorance. Ignorance is not just the absence of knowledge, it's an active disengagement from acquiring knowledge. Think of it as closing a book you've barely opened, perhaps due to lack of interest or even fear of what you may discover. Karl Popper, who was one of the 20th century's most influential philosophers of science, once said, "Ignorance is not a simple lack of knowledge, but an active aversion to knowledge, the refusal to know, issuing from cowardice, pride, or laziness of mind." After understanding what ignorance is, let's situate ignorance in an organizational context. Organizations are complex systems where individuals and groups work together. Each of these participants bring their own sets of preferences, interests, and knowledge to the table. Just as the different organs and systems in the human body, such as the circulatory, nervous, and digestive systems, must function coherently for overall health, different departments within an organization need to work efficiently for the entire organization to be successful. Traditionally, we often assume that knowledge is essential for organizational success. We focus on the extent of our knowledge and the speed with which we can acquire and apply it. If we consider knowledge as a known, which means information we are aware of and understand, then what about the known unknowns, unknown knowns, and unknown unknowns? If an organization knows it lacks expertise needed for a project, they are aware of the gap and can choose to hire a specialist or upskill their team. This is known unknowns, meaning things you know you don't know. If a seasoned employee has developed a highly efficient workflow over the years, but this knowledge is not documented or shared, making it an unknown known, the organization has valuable but hidden knowledge. Then there are unknown unknowns. An organization may be completely unaware of new regulations, putting it at risk of non-compliance and potential fines. That's unknown unknowns, things you don't even realize you don't know. Those scenarios represent different levels of organizational ignorance, and they can influence the organization's performance as much as its knowledge does. The point here is that organizational ignorance, why we don't know what we don't know, is more common in organizations than we may think. Therefore, alongside knowledge accumulation and organizational learning, it's important to identify and address the blind spots for a more comprehensive approach to organizational performance. Now that we've learned the construct of organizational ignorance, let's focus on a specific type of organizational ignorance. It takes place when an organization's lack of knowledge is not just incidental, but deliberate. This brings us to strategic ignorance, which refers to the deliberate avoidance of information or knowledge that could potentially influence an individual's or an organization's decisions, actions, or outcomes. Ignorance in an organization is not always unintentional or accidental. Sometimes it's by design. Strategic ignorance means making a conscious decision to ignore certain pieces of information, either because they are uncomfortable or inconvenient. While organizational ignorance is often about the unknowns, strategic ignorance is about choosing not to know. In organizations, there may be times when digging too deep into certain complexities, such as ethical considerations and potential consequences, could complicate matters and delay progress. In this case, the organization may opt for strategic ignorance, intentionally focusing only on specific aspects of the project, like its immediate objectives. Why does strategic ignorance exist in organizations? It serves two key functions. First, it can be used as a shield against blame when things do not go as planned. For example, a manager deliberately avoids looking at employees' performance reviews that may flag issues. If a project fails, this manager can then claim, "I was not aware of any problems," or "my team didn't express any concerns to me." Second, strategic ignorance can be used to project an image of expertise, particularly when there is uncertainty. Consider a consultant who zeroes in on data that backs up their recommendations, but disregards any information that could counter their position. They may use complex jargons to give the impression of rich expertise, even if their understanding of the issue is superficial. Have you ever noticed how some experts will never admit their understanding is limited or that there is any uncertainty involved? At its core, strategic ignorance is about manipulating what is known and what is not. It is a way to either avoid responsibility or appear more competent than one actually is. This sets it apart from simple non-knowledge, which is merely the absence of knowing something. Non-knowledge does not have an agenda. It's not leveraged to sidestep accountability or to feign expertise. What are the causes of organizational ignorance? 4 primary causes have been identified: personal motives, interpersonal relations, managerial practices, and organizational factors. First, personal motives. Employees refrain from sharing critical information or identifying issues out of fear of being labeled as a troublemaker. An employee notices problems but chooses to stay quiet. Why? They fear retribution or being targeted as a disruptor by their supervisor. Even though there are legal safeguards for whistleblowers, like the Whistleblower Protection Act of 1989, real-world application proves less ideal. Organizations may not fire whistleblowers immediately. Instead, the organizations set them up for failure by assigning tasks outside their skill set. This sets the stage for future dismissal on grounds of incompetency. This approach creates a culture where silence is more common than speaking up. The desire to avoid criticism or conflict is a powerful personal motive that can contribute to organizational ignorance. An employee, Joe, may observe that a particular operational process in the organization is inefficient. However, Joe may refrain from bringing it up due to concerns that it may incite conflict among colleagues who are committed to the current method. Employees may also have vested interests, especially in competitive settings. They may strategically withhold or hoard information to gain a competitive advantage in the organization. They may hold back innovative ideas with the intent to review them at an opportune moment that could lead to career advancement such as during annual reviews or strategic planning meetings. In this context, ignorance is exploited as a calculated asset, not a liability. Psychological knowledge ownership is another personal motive that contributes to organizational ignorance. It means the emotional attachment some people have with knowledge they've either created or acquired. Imagine an inventor and their invention. The inventor sees the invention as an extension of themselves, almost like a child. The same sentiment often holds true in organizational settings, where people consider their ideas, projects, or strategies as integral parts of their identity. Let's say an administrator, Jane, has implemented a new procedure A that Jane believes will revolutionize the workflow. Despite receiving repeated feedback from employees that procedure A is ineffective or problematic, Jane remains committed to it because procedure A has become an extension of Jane's self-identity. To validate Jane's work, she keeps soliciting feedback until she hears something positive, even if the majority opinion is against procedure A. This is why physicist Max Planck once said that science advances one funeral at a time. It is a figurative expression used to comment on the resistance to change in the scientific community, rather than a literal wish for anyone's passing. The focus is on the idea that scientific progress can be slow because older scientists with established views hold sway in their fields. Scientists, like anyone else, can become emotionally attached to their theories and ideas, viewing them as extensions of their identities. This can make them resistant to new evidence or theories that challenge their established views. As those older scientists often hold influential positions in their fields, such as editorship of major research journals, positions on grant committees, or tenured professorships, they can exert considerable influence over what research gets published or funded. As a result, younger scientists may find it difficult to introduce new ideas that contradict the dominant established theories and methods until the older generation is no longer in those positions of power. Only when those giants in the scientific community passes away are newer ideas more readily accepted. Hence the notion that science advances one funeral at a time. To be clear, neither Max Planck nor I am suggesting that this natural process should be expedited in any way. The point is to highlight how psychological ownership of knowledge can contribute to a slower rate of scientific progress in certain situations, just as in other types of organizations. Organizational ignorance is not uncommon in scientific communities. The second cause of organizational ignorance is the quality of interpersonal relations. High levels of trust can ironically lead to ignorance because people often conform to majority opinions and accept social norms, even if they are incorrect. For example, if a majority of members in a team believes that a particular strategy is effective, one member who thinks otherwise may keep quiet to avoid rocking the boat. This tendency to conform arises from a basic human need to belong and to be accepted by a group. When someone deviates from the group norms, they often face social consequences like being marginalized or ostracized, which discourage them from speaking up. On the other hand, if interpersonal relations are marked by distrust, knowledge hiding behaviors become more prevalent. There are 3 types of knowledge hiding behaviors. First, evasive hiding, which means providing incomplete or incorrect information. For example, someone may share only part of a project update, omitting issues that could reflect poorly on them. Second, rationalized hiding means offering misleading explanations. An employee could say that they cannot share certain information because it's confidential, even when it is not. Third, playing dumb means pretending not to know something in order to avoid sharing information. A team member pretends to be uninformed about a looming deadline to avoid taking on additional responsibilities. The third cause of organizational ignorance is managerial practices. One common practice that perpetuates ignorance is the tendency for those in leadership roles to ignore or dismiss disagreeing opinions. This is partly because people in positions of power often develop a tunnel vision, focusing mainly on their own objectives and perceptions. This selective attention can steer them away from solving real issues and toward safeguarding their own interests instead. Another managerial practice that encourages ignorance is what we call symbolic behavior. It's a disconnect between what is said publicly and what is actually done. For example, a leader may publicly champion the value of transparency, but then makes key decisions unilaterally, bypassing collective decision-making process. Or they may talk about the importance of creating an inclusive environment, yet in practice only includes those who agree with them. This divergence between words and actions not only breeds ignorance, but also erodes trust in the organization. The third managerial practice that contributes to organizational ignorance is destructive leadership behavior. This form of leadership is marked by several detrimental tactics. They include bullying and intimidation, where leaders use fear and aggression to control others; abusive supervision, where power is wielded to demean and belittle team members; micromanagement, where leaders excessively control or scrutinize every detail of their employees' work; and manipulation, where deception is used for personal gain. In a team led by a destructive leader, employees find themselves in a lose-lose situation. They're caught in a paradox. They're not given the autonomy to make the right decisions, yet they can always be blamed for any wrong outcomes. A destructive leader may use intimidation to place all responsibility on the team, even if the failure was due to the leader's own poor guidance or unclear goals. Another way destructive leadership contributes to organizational ignorance is by deliberately cultivating a lack of awareness among team members. For example, a manager engages in unethical practices like misusing funds may hire and promote employees who are not aware of those activities. By empowering those employees who are less likely to question or challenge the status quo, this manager can continue their unethical practices under the radar, at least for the short term. It's important to distinguish between destructive leadership and mere ineffectiveness. In the short term, a destructive leader may achieve seemingly positive job performance. However, the long-term impact include a harmful, a toxic work environment and detrimental effects on employee well-being. Such organizations typically experience high turnover rates, low morale, and decreased job satisfaction. Moreover, toxic work environments often exhibit what is called functional stupidity, where employees refrain from critical thinking and simply follow orders without questioning. In more extreme cases, a toxic triangle can develop, comprising a destructive leader, susceptible follower, and a conducive environment. This creates a fertile ground for organizational scandals and crises. The fourth cause of organizational ignorance is organizational factors. Organizations can set up norms or practices that inadvertently encourage organizational ignorance. For example, in some organizations, there is an unwritten rule not to question or interfere with colleagues' work. This mind your own business approach can discourage people from challenging accepted practices or beliefs, making the organization blind to potential improvements or risk. Sometimes organizations even shield themselves from new information, leading to a situation where they either lack essential data or are overwhelmed by too much of it. This often happens because of misguided incentives. In the organizational setting, if school administrators focus solely on maintaining a positive image of the school, they may neglect and even suppress problems and complaints raised by other organizational members. An example is that in 2011, Jerry Sandusky, a former assistant football coach at Penn State University, was arrested and charged with 52 counts of sexual abuse of young boys over a 15-year period. A key issue was that university officials were aware of some of allegations, but did not take adequate steps to investigate or put a stop to Sandusky's actions. Similarly, at Ohio State University, Dr. Richard Strauss, who served as a physician in the athletic department from the late 1970s to the 1990s, was accused of sexually abusing at least 177 male students. An investigation found that personnel at the university failed to act on complaints about Strauss, thus allowing the abuse to continue for years. In organizations, how decisions are made and who makes decisions can greatly influence what the organization knows and ignores. When only a few people at the top make all the decisions, and there is not a proper way for others to provide feedback, the organization can miss out on important information, leading to organizational ignorance. Let's say the leaders in our organization don't have a system for employees to report issues or suggest improvements. This means that useful information from staff on the front lines are never heard. Problems go unsolved and opportunities are missed. When an organization has a strict hierarchy, those at the top usually control who gets access to important information. This control can be very powerful because information is key to making good decisions. If you control the information, you can influence the decisions and even who gets to make them. Now, because the top-level leaders have this control, they often appear more competent or indispensable than they actually are. This creates a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy. The people at the top seem to be justified in being at the top because they're the ones who have the information. In other words, they stay in power partly because they control the flow of information. This centralized structure can be problematic because it limits the diversity of viewpoints that could contribute to better decision-making. If only a selective few are heard, the organization misses out innovative ideas and critical feedback that may otherwise come from people lower in the hierarchy. Imagine in a hospital where only senior doctors seem comfortable speaking up, while nurses or junior doctors, who often spend more time and have more direct contact with patients, hesitate to share observations. The hospital may miss critical patient information. When an organization structure does not allow for open communication and centralizes its decision-making, it's more likely to overlook important details, which can lead to organizational ignorance. Organizations can also fall into the trap of non-learning, which means they ignore problems that will likely become important in the future. This can happen when an organization is overwhelmed with immediate concerns and lacks the bandwidth to think about long-term or distant issues. A manufacturing company is so focused on meeting this month's production goals that it ignores warning signs of future equipment failure. Another form of not learning is called institutional amnesia. This is when an organization forgets valuable lessons from its own history that are relevant to their current operation or decision making. Institutional amnesia could be a result of frequent staff turnover, a focus on short-term goals, or a deliberate effort to forget or ignore uncomfortable aspects of the organization's past. An organization that suffers from institutional amnesia keeps repeating past mistakes and does not demonstrate innovation and improvement. For example, an organization makes a hiring mistake but fails to update its hiring process to prevent similar issues in the future. Let's say a company once hired an employee who was a poor fit for the role. Despite their impressive resume, the employee struggled to meet deadlines and work well with the team. The organization had to invest time and resources to manage the situation, which ultimately ended in termination. However, because the organization did not take the time to examine what went wrong in the hiring process, it continues to use the same ineffective screening methods. This sets the stage for the company to potentially make the same mistake again, hiring another ill-suited candidate. In this video, I introduced organizational ignorance, what it is, and the 4 causes of organizational ignorance. The next move is yours. How will you apply what you've learned today to minimize organizational ignorance in your workplace? If you're interested in learning more about theories of management, administration, and leadership, be sure to tune in into my future videos. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.